The gangster of tonight's story is Griselda Blanco, the godmother of Miami, in a world run by men. Griselda Blanco made her own place using her clever mind, though she did it in a very cruel way. Please remember to like our video and subscribe to our channel if you like what we make. Now, please get comfortable and close your eyes if you are in bed, or sit on your favorite couch and let yourself get lost in tonight's story. I also really like to know where you are watching from and what time it is there. Reading comments from people all over the globe makes me very happy. I hope you enjoy it. The day was February 15th, 1943, even though some people would later say it happened in Santa Marta, not Cartagena, when the baby girl took her first breath. There was no special sign in the sky to show the darkness that would grow from this simple start. Ana Lucia Restrepo held her new baby daughter with hands that were already rough and tough for many years of cleaning floors and washing clothes for other people. She gave the child the name Griselda, a name from Germany that means battle maiden, which was a strange and accidental prediction of the life that was waiting for her. The tiny one-room home where they lived gave them little warmth or safety. Its weak walls let the noises of fights and crime from the street come inside like a dangerous bedtime song. The neighborhood was not a place for a happy childhood. It was a confusing maze of tight alleyways where kids learned how to stay safe from danger before they learned how to read books, where staying alive was more important than being good, and where Griselda Blanco would get her lessons in the hardest school you could think of the streets. Her mother's own life had been full of letdowns and people letting her down, which filled her with a deep anger that she often poured out onto her daughter. When she was drunk, which happened a lot, she would yell horrible, hurtful words that cut deeper than any knife. Hitting and punishment came next for mistakes, both real and made up, teaching young Griselda that hurt was just a normal part of life. You think this hurts? Ana Lucia would growl after hitting her daughter, her breath smelling of cheap alcohol. The world will hurt you much worse if you are weak. I am making you strong. By the time she was 8 years old, Griselda had learned a strange calmness when facing her mother's anger. An empty look on her face that hid the plans already forming behind her dark, watchful eyes. She was learning that showing feelings was dangerous. That showing you could be hurt invited people to take advantage of you. And that power belonged to people who were willing to take it without feeling sorry. The streets of the neighborhood offered their own cruel lessons. Children with thin faces and hungry eyes fought for scraps, both real pieces of food and chances to get ahead. Griselda watched, she learned, and she soon became better than the other kids at the art of staying alive. Her small fingers became quick and skilled tools for stealing, taking wallets and watches from distracted tourists and businessmen with a talent that seemed impossible for someone so young. An older pickpocket named Miguel saw her natural skill when she was just 9 years old. He was maybe 16, with a crooked scar on his left cheek and eyes that had lost their childish sparkle long ago. "You have good hands," he told her one evening after watching her work in the marketplace. "But you are taking small change when you could be taking big bills." And so began her training in more advanced kinds of crime. Miguel taught her how to pick the best targets, how to create distractions, and how to move through crowds without being seen. He showed her how to make fake papers. Bus passes first, then identification cards. Griselda learned these lessons with a focus that sometimes made even her teacher feel uneasy. Most kids. "They do this because they are hungry," Miguel said once. You look like you are saving all this knowledge for something much bigger." Griselda just shrugged. "Maybe I am." People in the neighborhood talked quietly about something that happened when she was 11. though in later years many would wonder if it was true, or just a story that became part of the legend around her name. The tale, told in whispers behind closed doors, was about the kidnapping of a boy from a rich family in Medellin. A crime planned by older criminals, but one where young Griselda was said to have helped. According to these whispers, when the plan to get ransom money went wrong, it was Griselda who pulled the trigger without pausing, looking into the scared eyes of a child not much older than herself, and ended his life with the coldness of someone turning off a light. No police reports would ever prove this story, and people who said they knew the truth often disagreed on the important details. But the story stayed alive, growing like a dark legend around her name, whether it was true or made up by her early teenage years. Griselda had moved on from pickpocketing to more money-making activities. The boom after the war in the 1950s had created new markets for illegal goods and services, and Medellin's criminal world was getting bigger to meet the demand. For a young woman with no real schooling, but a sharp understanding of people's weaknesses, there were plenty of opportunities. It was during this time that Griselda's looks began to change from a street kid to a young woman who understood the power of her beauty. She learned to use her growing attractiveness as another weapon, trapping men with promises her eyes made, but her heart never planned to keep. By age 15, she had started doing sex work, not because she had no choice, like many women in the neighborhood, but as a planned way to reach a goal. Each meeting was a business deal where she collected not just money, but information, connections, and power over men who thought they were strong. Men are simple, she told Lucia, another young woman who worked the same streets. They think with what is between their legs, not what is between their ears. Remember that, and you will never be as weak as they think you are. Lucia, a thin girl with eyes that were always frightened, shook her head. I just want to make it to tomorrow. I want more than just making it, Griselda replied, her stare fixed on the shiny tall buildings in the distance. Where Medellin's rich people lived in luxury, it seemed as far away as the moon. I want everything they have and everything they are scared to lose. It was through this work that Griselda first met Carlos Trujillo, a man almost twice her age who was an expert in making fake papers and smuggling people. Unlike other men who only saw her body, Trujillo saw something like himself in the clever mind behind her eyes. He started to show her the details of his work, how to create passports and visas so real they could trick even careful officials, how to move people across borders where normal crossings were not possible. Their relationship changed from business to romance, though romance is maybe too gentle a word for the bond between two people who saw love mostly as a weakness to be used in others. They got married when Griselda was 17, a partnership that was as much a business deal as a marriage. We understand each other, Trujillo told her on their wedding night, as they sat counting the day's money instead of doing what new couples usually do. That is worth more than all the love songs and poems in the world, Griselda nodded, allowing herself a rare, real smile. Understanding is power. Love is just a leash other people use to control you. The marriage quickly gave them 3 sons, Dixon, Uber, and Oswaldo. Being a mother did not make Griselda softer like it might have for other women. She saw her children as extensions of herself, future fighters in whatever war she would choose to fight. She was not mean to them, like her own mother had been to her, but she also did not give them the gentle love most mothers give their children. The world will not be nice to them because they are mine, she explained to a neighbor who asked about her coldness. It is better they learn strength from me than weakness from other people. While raising her sons, Griselda kept growing her criminal business with Trujillo. Their fake paper business grew. Getting a reputation for quality that let them charge high prices, they began smuggling not just people, but goods, illegal cigarettes, alcohol, and then small amounts of marijuana and cocaine. The 1960s brought political trouble to Colombia, with growing fights between government forces, leftist rebels, and right-wing militias, creating a perfect place for criminal businesses to grow in the gaps of power. Medellin, with its good location and growing industry, became a center for a new drug trade that would soon change the country's future. Griselda watched these changes with the sharp eye of a hunter finding new places to hunt. The possible profits in drugs were much bigger than anything their current business could make. But Trujillo was nervous about moving too fast into such risky business. The police looked the other way with papers and smuggling. He warned during one of their late-night planning meetings. Drugs are different. The Americans are pushing for big arrests. The punishments are worse. The risks are higher because the rewards are higher, Griselda argued, her voice holding the quiet confidence that had become her trademark. People who wait now will work for people who act. Their disagreement on this important direction created the first big crack in their partnership. Trujillo wanted to keep their current business with slow growth, while Griselda's dreams had grown bigger than even she had once imagined. The end of their marriage came suddenly, though stories of exactly how are very different. The official record would later say that Carlos Trujillo died of natural causes, a heart attack in his sleep. But whispers in the criminal world suggested a different story, that Griselda, tired of his caution and ready to take full control of their business, had ordered a killing of her own husband. The truth is maybe somewhere between these stories, buried with Trujillo in a plain grave that Griselda visited only once, standing without tears as her sons, now aged 7, 5, and 4, watched with looks that copied her own coldness. Is Papa in heaven? Oswaldo, the youngest, asked with the honesty of a child. Griselda looked down at her son, thinking about her answer carefully. Your father is wherever people go when they are finished with this world, she finally said. What matters is what he taught us while he was here. That surviving belongs to people who take what they need without asking for permission. As the cemetery workers filled in the grave, Griselda Blanco stood at the start of a new part of her life. At 25, she was a widow with 3 young sons, a successful fake paper business, and connections all through Medellin's criminal ranks. But the woman who walked away from that gravesite was already looking past these small beginnings. The Colombia of the late 1960s was changing, and with it the chances for someone with Griselda's special skills and lack of normal morals. The seeds planted in the tough ground of her childhood had grown into something powerful. A woman who had learned to move through a world of violence and abuse by becoming its master instead of its victim. What no one, maybe not even Griselda herself, could fully guess was just how far this journey would take her. From the hopeless streets of a poor neighborhood to the top of criminal power, leaving a path of blood and legend that would finally earn her the nickname that would send fear through even the tough world of international drug smuggling, the Black Widow. But on that day, as she led her sons from their father's grave, she was still just a woman at the beginning of her rise, gathering her strength for the climb ahead, her eyes fixed not on what she was leaving behind, but on the empire she had already started to dream of in the dark hours before sunrise, when the Queen's neighborhood was still covered in darkness. Griselda Blanco would often stand by her apartment window, watching the city wake up. The street lights made long shadows on the ground below, and sometimes a car would drive past, its headlights for a moment lighting up the small, normal-looking woman with intense dark eyes that seemed to measure everything they saw. It was the late 1960s, And New York City was changing, just like Griselda herself was going through her own change. The trip to Queens had been hard. Columbia, with its green mountains and lively streets of Medellin, was a world away from the concrete world of New York. Griselda had arrived with her second husband, Alberto Bravo, a man whose charm was equal to his ambition. Their entry into the United States had been secret fake papers, quiet arrangements, and the constant fear of being caught. But Griselda was no stranger to fear. She had learned to use it, to change it into a cold determination that would later become her trademark. Her mind was already racing with possibilities. She understood the potential of their new home. A huge, hungry city wanting escape, wanting pleasure, wanting the white powder that could give both, even if only for a short time. The early days were hard. They moved carefully, learning the rhythms of the city, finding possible friends and enemies. Griselda watched the existing drug operations with a critical eye. Most were messy and inefficient. She saw chances where others saw only problems. The problem, she explained to Alberto one night as they sat at their kitchen table, counting the small profits from their first little deals, is how they move the product. They are moving it like beginners, taking dumb risks. Alberto leaned back in his chair, lighting a cigarette. And you have a better idea? The smile that crossed Griselda's face was small, but sure. I do. Her new idea was simple but smart. While others were using obvious carriers who got attention, Griselda started hiring women, normal-looking women who could disappear into any crowd. Mothers, grandmothers, young office workers. Women no one would suspect. Noria was one of the first, a middle-aged seamstress with 3 children. She had come to Griselda looking for work after her husband had left the family. I need money for my children, Maria had said, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. I will do anything. Griselda had studied her thoughtfully. You sew? You are good with your hands? When Maria nodded, Griselda's plans started to take shape. Within weeks, Maria was making underwear with hidden pockets, delicate, invisible places that could hold small packages of cocaine. The clothes looked normal, even fancy, but carried a fortune in drugs. By 1970, Griselda had made her operation bigger. The underwear was just the start. She designed suitcases with false bottoms, made with great skill. No different from regular luggage, her carriers traveled regularly between Colombia and New York, each carrying several kilograms of very pure cocaine. You see, she explained to Alberto as they counted an increasingly big pile of cash, no one looks twice at a woman bringing back underwear from Colombia, or a businessman with a suitcase. We hide where everyone can see us. Alberto, who was doubtful at first, was now a true believer. Their partnership did well, both in business and in their personal life. They moved to a bigger apartment, bought expensive clothes, and started to taste the luxury that had always been out of Griselda's reach in her poor childhood. But with success came attention. Not from the police, not yet, but from competitors. The established drug networks in New York watched the Colombian couple with growing worry. Their efficiency was messing up the market. Their product was better, and their distribution network was growing fast. One rainy evening in 1971, Griselda got a visitor. Carlos Mendez was a representative of one of the Dominican operations that had before controlled much of the cocaine trade in Queens. Mrs. Blanco, he said, his voice soft, but his eyes hard. We need to talk about boundaries. Griselda offered him coffee. Her movements slow, her face friendly. Of course, Mr. Mendez. Please sit. What followed was a perfect lesson in negotiation, where Carlos expected to scare her. He found himself instead pulled into Griselda's web of logic and shared benefit. By the end of the meeting, Not only had she refused to limit her operations, but she had also made a partnership that would let her use Carlos's distribution network. "You are either very brave or very foolish," Carlos said as he got ready to leave. Griselda's smile did not reach her eyes. "Maybe I am just very sure about the quality of my product and the efficiency of my business. Would you rather fight against me or make money with me?" Carlos left with a new business deal and a new respect for the Colombian woman who had outsmarted him so completely. By 1972, Griselda's carrier network had grown a lot. She was moving many kilograms every week with a precision that kept losses low and profits high. Her operation was a perfect example of careful planning. Each carrier had a specific route, a specific contact, a specific delivery spot. Nothing was left to chance. The money flowed in, and with it came power. Griselda and Alberto started investing in real businesses, a shop that sold the very underwear that had started their empire, a small import company that gave perfect cover for their activities, and property all over Queens. Their home life took on the signs of success. They had dinner parties for their growing circle of partners, both criminal and real. Griselda, once the poor girl from the slums of Medellin, now wore designer clothes and jewelry. She developed a taste for fine wines and fancy food. But under the surface of respectability, the operation kept growing. "We should expand," Alberto suggested one night as they lay in bed. The sounds of the city, a far-off hum through their bedroom window. "Miami is opening up. The need there is amazing." Griselda thought about this, her mind figuring out risks and rewards. "Not yet. We make our operation perfect here first. Then we go south." Her caution was smart. By 1973, the police were starting to notice the increasing flow of cocaine into New York. The D, still a pretty new agency, was especially interested in finding the sources of the high-quality cocaine flooding the city streets. Agent Robert Williams was put in charge of investigating the growing Colombian presence in the drug trade. A careful man with 10 years of experience, he started mapping the networks, finding key players, and building a case. "Whoa, there is someone new in Queens," he told his boss during a meeting. "Someone smart. The product is moving in ways we have not seen before. Women carriers, clever hiding methods. Whoever is running this operation knows what they are doing." The investigation moved slowly. Griselda had been careful to keep herself away from the street-level operations. Her name was whispered rather than spoken, her direct involvement almost impossible to prove. But as 1974 began, the pressure started to build. Several of Griselda's carriers were stopped at JFK Airport. While they revealed nothing under questioning, the lost shipments were a big loss and a worrying sign. "We need to be more careful," Griselda told Alberto during a tense meeting with their top people. "Change the routes, change the methods. We change or we die." The changes were quick and worked well. Griselda started using commercial shipping containers, hiding cocaine among real imports. She set up multiple backup supply lines, making sure that if one was found, others would keep working. And she put in a strict security plan, keeping information separate so that no single person except herself and Alberto understood the full picture of the operation. Even with these precautions, the deal was getting closer. Operation Banshee, as the investigation was called, had been collecting evidence for months. Agent Williams and his team had turned several low-level sellers, each giving pieces of the puzzle that was Griselda's organization. "We are getting closer," Williams reported in early 1975. "We have found at least 30 people connected to this network, and we are hearing a name, Griselda Blanco. She and her husband, Alberto Bravo, seemed to be the planners of this whole operation. The evidence kept adding up. Money records showed suspicious transactions. Surveillance photos caught meetings between known partners. Wiretaps recorded conversations that, while in code, clearly talked about drug shipments. In April 1975, a federal grand jury gave charges against 30 people connected to Griselda's operation, charging them with planning to import cocaine. It was a big action made to take apart the whole network in one move. But Griselda had not survived and done well without developing a sharp sense for danger. She had found sources inside the police, paying well for information that might affect her business. 3 days before the planned arrests, she got a phone call. "They are coming," her source said simply. "The charges are signed. They know everything." That night, Griselda and Alberto had their last conversation on American soil. Sitting in their living room, the lights of Queens shining beyond their windows. They thought about their choices. "We have to leave," Alberto insisted. "Return to Colombia. Start again." Griselda was unusually quiet, her fingers absently touching the edge of her wine glass. "Everything we have built here," she finally said, "is gone," Alberto finished for her. "For now, but we have money in Colombia." "This is a problem, not the end," Griselda nodded slowly. "Arrange it quietly. We leave separately. I will go first." The next morning, Griselda Blanco, carrying only a small suitcase and wearing a simple dress that made her look like any other middle-aged woman, got on a flight to Bogota. By the time Agent Williams and his team carried out their arrest papers, she was already gone, leaving behind an empire that at its best had moved hundreds of kilograms of cocaine each month and made millions in profits. In Colombia, as the news of the American charges reached her, Griselda stood on the balcony of a house in Medellin, looking out over the city where she was born. The girl who had once known poverty and desperation had returned as a woman of wealth and influence, a runaway from American justice, but still very much in control of her own future. "This is just the beginning," she told Alberto when he joined her a few days later. "We learned in New York. Now we use those lessons somewhere else." Her eyes turned south toward Miami, a city that would soon come to know her name all too well. The operation in Queens had been clever and profitable, but it was only the opening act to what would become one of the most famous criminal careers in the history of the drug trade. As night fell over Medellin, Griselda Blanco, the woman who had changed cocaine smuggling with underwear and false-bottom suitcases, who had built and lost an empire in the shadows of New York City, started to plan her next move. The godmother, as she would come to be called, was just getting started. The night air felt thick over Bogota, carrying with it the faint smell of rain that had fallen earlier in the evening. The bright lights of the nightclub flashed in the darkness, casting a strange glow across the parking lot, where expensive cars shone under the street lights. Inside, the bass beat like a heart, but Griselda Blanco's mind was somewhere else, focused on numbers that did not make sense and suspicions that had been growing for months. Alberto Bravo, her second husband and business partner, sat across from her at their special table, laughing with partners as he drank expensive whiskey. His gold jewelry caught the light as he moved, telling some story she was not bothering to listen to. Once she had found his confidence attractive. Now it felt like he was making fun of her. Griselda watched him through narrowed eyes. The ice in her glass long melted. Her informants had been clear. Millions of dollars from their cocaine business had vanished, and Alberto's personal bank accounts had strangely grown. The betrayal burned inside her, a cold, familiar anger that had become her friend through the years. "We should go," she said finally, interrupting whatever Alberto was saying. Her voice was soft, but carried an unmistakable order. Alberto looked at her, his smile fading a little before he recovered. "So early, my love? The night is just starting. We have business to discuss," Griselda replied, already standing in private. The other men at the table exchanged looks, but knew better than to say anything. In Colombia's criminal world, Griselda Blanco was already becoming a legend. La Madrina, the Black Widow, the woman who had cut her way from the slums of Medellin to become one of the most frightening figures in the cocaine trade. Alberto nodded, finishing his glass. "As you wish." They moved through the club like royalty. People stepped aside without thinking. Griselda's bodyguards walked beside them, their eyes always looking for threats. 6 men loyal to Alberto followed behind, their presence a reminder of the delicate balance of power in their marriage. The parking lot was quieter than the club, the music now muffled behind thick walls. Griselda's driver stood by her black Mercedes, but she did not move toward it. Instead, she turned to face Alberto in the half-privacy between parked cars. "You have been stealing from me," she said without warning, her voice strangely calm. Alberto's face hardened. "Be careful with your accusations, Griselda. We are partners, remember? What is mine is yours. Then why are there millions missing from our accounts? Why does your cousin in Miami suddenly have a new huge house? Why do you have a separate bank account I was not supposed to know about?" Each question fell between them like a heavy stone. The night seemed to freeze around them. Even the bodyguards, professionals who had seen countless dangerous moments, got tense without seeming to. Alberto laughed, but there was no happiness in it. "You have your spies everywhere, do not you? Even in my bedroom." "I needed to know if I could trust my husband," Griselda replied. "Clearly I cannot." Alberto's voice rose a little. "You want to talk about trust? How many men have you threatened, hurt, or killed because you could not trust them? You see betrayal everywhere, Griselda. It is your sickness." Maybe he was right. Griselda thought for a second. Trust had never come easily to her. Not since her childhood in the slums, where surviving meant suspecting everyone. But this was not just being paranoid. The proof was too solid, the numbers too exact. "Give back what you have taken," she said, "and maybe we can continue our arrangement." Alberto's face darkened. "There is nothing to give back. And you forget yourself, Griselda. Without me, you would still be a small-time dealer in Medellin. I built these connections. I made these routes possible. We built this empire together," Griselda corrected, her voice dropping dangerously low. "And no one steals from me. Not even you." The air between them felt electric with tension. Their bodyguards shifted uncomfortably, hands moving closer to hidden weapons. "Is this why you brought me out here?" Alberto asked, looking around the parking lot. "To threaten me? Or worse?" Griselda did not answer right away. The truth was, she had not fully decided his fate until this very moment. She had hoped, maybe foolishly, that he would admit it, say sorry, make things right. But the defiance in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. "I brought you here to give you a chance," she said finally. "One you clearly do not deserve." What happened next occurred with a terrible clarity that often comes with moments of extreme violence. Some would later say Alberto reached for his gun first. Others would claim Griselda gave a signal to her men. The truth, as always in such matters, was likely somewhere in between. A shared understanding that the fight had passed the point of no return. Gunfire exploded in the parking lot, breaking the relative quiet of the night. Car windows shattered. Metal pings of bullets hit their marks, and men shouted in a chaotic mess of violence. Alberto and his 6 bodyguards had come ready for trouble, but so had Griselda. Her men were placed in smart positions, and they fired with the precision of people who knew their lives depended on their accuracy. Griselda herself pulled out her own pistol, a small .38 she always carried. Later, the story would grow that she had personally killed Alberto, facing him down like something from an old Western movie. The reality was messier, more chaotic. In the exchange of gunfire, she saw Alberto fall, many bullets finding their mark. Whether one of those bullets was hers became unimportant in the legend that would later surround her. A sharp pain tore through her stomach, and Griselda realized she had been hit. She staggered back against a car, one hand pressed to the bleeding wound around her. The gunfire was stopping as quickly as it had begun. Bodies lay scattered across the asphalt. Alberto and all 6 of his men. One of her bodyguards rushed to her side. "Patrona, you are hurt. We need to get you to a doctor." Griselda nodded, letting herself be helped toward the waiting car. As they passed Alberto's body, she paused, looking down at the man she had once loved, the father of one of her sons. His eyes stared sightlessly at the night sky, his expensive suit now soaked with blood. "Make sure he is dead," she said coldly before continuing to the car. The wound was serious, but not deadly. A bullet had gone through her side, missing important organs. A private doctor was called to a safe house, one of many Griselda kept throughout Bogota. As he worked to stop the bleeding and close the wound, Griselda stayed awake, giving orders between gritted teeth. "Contact our people in the police department," she told one of her lieutenants. "Make sure this disappears." "Already done, patrona," the man assured her. "The right envelopes of money are being delivered as we speak." Griselda nodded, grimacing as the doctor injected medicine to numb the area around her wound. The Colombian authorities would ask no questions, file no charges. Money had a way of making sure people stayed quiet, and Griselda had plenty to spare, even with what Alberto had stolen. As the doctor worked, Griselda's mind was already turning to the future. Alberto's betrayal had made problems, but also opportunities. His connections would need to be secured, his part of the business taken over. There would be people who might see this moment as a sign of weakness, a chance to move against her. It would need to be dealt with quickly and without mercy. "Send word to Pablo," she said, referring to Pablo Escobar, the rising power in Medellin, with whom she had a complicated relationship of mutual respect and wariness. "Tell him what happened here was internal business, nothing that changes our arrangements." Rumors would later spread that Escobar himself had planned Alberto's killing, seeing a chance to make his own position stronger or get rid of a rival. Griselda knew these whispers would come out, and in some ways they might be useful. Let enemies wonder about her connections, her reach. The doctor finished his work, bandaging her wound and telling her to rest advice. Griselda had no plan to follow completely. "You are lucky," he told her, "another inch to the left, and we would not be having this conversation." Griselda smiled thinly. "Luck has nothing to do with it, doctor. I am still alive because I am meant to be." After he left, one of her most trusted lieutenants, Carlos, came over with a glass of whiskey and her medicine. "The streets are already talking, patrona," he said quietly. "They are saying you killed Alberto yourself, stood over him, and put 3 bullets in his chest." Griselda took the whiskey. Thinking about this, the reality had been chaotic. A shootout where everyone had been firing. Had one of her bullets hit Alberto? Possibly. Did it matter? Not really. What mattered was what people thought. The story that would be told. "Let them talk," she said finally. "Fear is a more useful weapon than any gun." Carlos nodded, understanding perfectly. In their world, your reputation was like money, and Griselda's had just become much more valuable. The woman who killed her husband when he betrayed her. It was the kind of story that would stop future betrayals. That night, as Griselda lay in bed, pain throbbing under her bandages, she thought about the method of Alberto's death. A fight, face to face, guns pulled. It was almost honorable in its way, but in their business, honor was a luxury few could afford. She remembered something she had seen in Medellin years before. Killers on motorcycles able to come up quickly, fire, and disappear into traffic before anyone could react. It was efficient, anonymous, and nearly impossible to defend against. Some would later claim that Griselda invented the motorcycle hit trick after the Bogota shootout, copying it from existing methods or creating it completely new. The truth was less clear. Such tricks had been used before in Colombia's violent history, but Griselda would certainly improve and use them with the frequency and effectiveness that became her trademark. As dawn broke over Bogota, Griselda made a decision. The fight with Alberto had been necessary but messy. In the future, her enemies would never see her coming. They would simply feel the rush of air as a motorcycle passed, hear the crack of gunfire, and then nothing at all. News of the Bogota shootout spread fast through Colombia's criminal world. By the next evening, as Griselda received visitors in her safe house, the story had already grown in the telling. Alberto had not just been killed, he had been executed. Griselda had not simply been involved. She had personally made sure her husband died. One of these visitors was Jorge Ochoa, a powerful figure in the new Medellin cartel. He brought expensive wine and careful congratulations. "They are calling you La Madrina now more than ever," he told her. Sipping his drink, the godmother who shows no mercy. Not even to her husband, Griselda smiled, changing her position to ease the pain in her side. "And what do you think, Jorge? Was I too harsh?" Ochoa thought about his words carefully. "I think Alberto made a deadly mistake. He forgot who he was married to." "He stole from me," Griselda said simply. "No one steals from me. A lesson many will remember," Ochoa nodded. "But be careful, Griselda. You have made yourself even more visible now. The authorities are paid well to look the other way," she interrupted. As always, this was true enough. After the shooting, the expected police investigation had been quick and shallow at best. Money had changed hands. Reports had been filed and promptly forgotten. And Griselda's name had never formally appeared in any paperwork. After Ochoa left, Griselda stood carefully and walked to the window. Looking out at the Bogota skyline, the pain in her side was a constant reminder of how close she had come to death. Alberto had been prepared, had brought men ready to kill. If her informant had not warned her of his plans, the result might have been very different. Trust no one completely. It was a lesson she had learned early, and one that had saved her life more than once, even as she got better from her wound. Griselda was already planning her next moves. Alberto's death had left empty spaces to be filled, territories to be secured. There would be challenges to her power, tests of her will. Let them come, she thought. They would learn what Alberto had learned too late, that Griselda Blanco's revenge was fast, merciless, and absolute. In the weeks that followed, as Griselda got back her strength and made her position solid, the legend of the Bogota parking lot fight grew. With each telling, the details changed a little. Alberto became more evil, Griselda more calculating in her revenge. The truth, with all its messy complications and split-second decisions, gave way to a cleaner story that served her purposes. And if Pablo Escobar, hearing these stories, smiled knowingly and said nothing about his own possible involvement in planning the fight, well, that too was part of the complex dance of power and perception that defined their world. Griselda neither confirmed nor denied the different versions of events going around. Instead, she let the uncertainty work for her, creating an aura of dangerous unpredictability that served as its own form of protection. They say the devil's greatest trick was convincing the world he did not exist. One of her lieutenants commented one evening, "Your greatest trick might be letting the world believe every story they hear about you." True or not, Griselda thought about this, running her finger along the scar that Alberto's bullet had left. "Fear is built on stories," she replied, "and I planned to be the most frightening story of all." The year was 1978, and Miami was changing before her eyes, a change she planned to both watch and control. Her slender fingers held the railing as she looked at what would become her kingdom, the diamond-covered bracelet on her wrist, catching the last sunlight. Behind her, Dario Sepulveda came closer with quiet confidence. Unlike her previous husbands, Dario carried himself with the careful precision of a chess player. As one of her most trusted enforcers, he had proven himself not just with his loyalty, but with his strategic mind, a quality Griselda had come to value more than simple force. "The Ochoas confirmed the shipment for next week," he said, his voice low and steady as he joined her at the railing. "Carlos Letter is handling the transportation personally," Griselda nodded, a small smile playing across her lips. "Good. I want you to watch over the distribution once it arrives. No mistakes this time." Their relationship had begun as business. Dario the enforcer, Griselda the visionary. But something deeper had grown between them. Maybe it was their shared understanding of power, or maybe it was the way he looked at her, not with fear like the others, but with real admiration for her ambition. Their wedding had been a small event by her standards. Only the most trusted partners there, gifts of gold and loyalty offered with bowed heads. The Miami operation was still taking shape, and Griselda preferred to keep a pretty low profile as she set up her networks. Still, she had worn white, a traditional bride in a non-traditional world, with a diamond necklace worth more than most people's houses around her neck. "What are you thinking about?" Dario asked, studying her thoughtful expression. "The future," she replied simply. "Miami is different from Colombia. The rules here, they bend in different ways." The birth of their son, Michael Corleone Blanco, had changed something in Griselda. Named after the character from The Godfather, a movie she had watched over and over, studying the business plans and family dynamics, Michael represented something new in her life, her fourth son, but maybe the one born at the most important moment in her rising empire. "He has your eyes." Dario had whispered in the hospital room, holding the newborn with a gentleness few would believe his hands capable of. Griselda had smiled then, a rare, real smile. "But he will have your patience, I can already tell." The move to Miami had been strategic. Colombia had become more and more complicated, with too many competing interests and growing attention from authorities. Miami, with its busy port, its growing Colombian expatriate community, and its endless hunger for cocaine, presented the perfect chance for expansion. The change had not been simple. Setting up a new operation needed careful planning, strategic alliances, and occasional shows of her willingness to enforce her will. "The Diaz brothers are asking for a meeting," Dario told her, breaking her thoughts. "They are nervous about the new territory arrangements." Griselda turned from the view, her expression hardening a little. "Let them be nervous. They will adjust or they will disappear. Miami is not big enough for confusion. Inside the mansion, the decoration showed Griselda's complex personality, religious icons, shared space with fancy furniture, and modern security systems. She had always been a woman of opposites, deeply superstitious, yet ruthlessly practical, capable of motherly tenderness and unflinching cruelty. The network she was building in Miami was different from her Colombian operation. Here she needed to be more careful, more strategic. The wholesale distribution model she imagined would make her direct exposure smaller while making profits as big as possible. Her organization, though smaller than some reports would later claim, worked with military precision. Dozens of loyal soldiers, not hundreds, as some sensationalized stories would suggest, formed the core of her Miami operation. "I have secured 3 more properties across the city," Dario said. "Following her inside, safe houses as you asked for, untraceable through fake companies." Griselda nodded approvingly. Later that evening, as Miami's nightlife started to pulse through the city, Griselda had a small gathering of her most trusted lieutenants. The meeting happened in the wood-paneled study of her mansion, where the air was thick with cigar smoke and quiet conversations. "Miami is not Medellin," she explained, her voice commanding attention, even though it was soft. "The authorities here are different. They can be bought, yes, but they are watched more closely. We work with more subtlety here." One of her newer partners, a young man eager to prove himself, shifted uncomfortably. "But Patrona, our reputation will build itself," she interrupted, her dark eyes fixing on him with an intensity that made him look away. "Through being reliable and having quality product. Through business sense, violence is a tool, not a sign for everyone to see." This way of thinking showed an evolution in Griselda's approach. While she never hesitated to use force when needed, in Miami, she saw the need for a more sophisticated operation. The wholesale model she used let her keep distance from street-level distribution, making her exposure smaller, while her profits grew hugely. Her relationship with the Ochoa brothers and Carlos Leder was complicated, though she got product through them and kept polite business relations. Griselda fiercely guarded her independence. She was not just an extension of the Medellin operation. She was her own power, her own empire. "Jorge Ochoa respects strength and reliability," she once explained to Dario as they lay in bed. "The Miami moonlight coming through the curtains. So we show both, but we never become dependent. Being dependent is death in this business." Dario understood this thinking better than most. His background as an enforcer had taught him the value of independence. "The moment they see us as just an extension, we become disposable," he agreed. Their partnership, both personal and professional, did well in those early Miami days. Dario's strategic mind matched Griselda's visionary ambition, creating an operation that grew more clever with each passing month. The birth of Michael had softened some edges of their life while sharpening others. Griselda insisted on an appearance of normal life for her youngest son. A beautiful nursery in their main home, regular visits from a private children's doctor, even occasional walks in the park under heavy guard. Yet Michael's existence also made her paranoia about security stronger, and her determination to make her position solid. "I want him to have choices I never had," she told Dario one evening as they watched their son sleep. "Power gives choices," Dario had nodded, understanding the complex mix of ambition and motherly instinct that drove his wife. By late 1979, Griselda's Miami operation had set down firm roots. Her network of safe houses and luxury properties created a web across the city, places to do business, entertain partners, or simply disappear when needed. Her main home, the waterfront mansion, became known for its huge parties, where real businessmen mixed unknowingly with cartel partners and corrupt officials. These gatherings served many purposes, cleaning her public image, gathering information, and making connections that blurred the lines between Miami's criminal world and its real society. Griselda, dressed in designer clothes with her hair perfectly styled, played the role of successful businesswoman and gracious host with surprising ease. Politics and business are the same game with different rules, she said to one of Miami's important real estate developers at one such gathering. Champagne glass in hand, do not you agree? The developer, unaware of his host's true business, had laughed appreciatively at what he thought was an immigrant's smart observation about American capitalism. Behind these social masks, however, Griselda's operation kept its ruthless efficiency. The distribution network she set up moved product with amazing speed and discretion, while the street-level sales stayed deliberately disconnected from her direct control. The wholesale supply flowed through channels she watched personally. Her relationship with her suppliers in Colombia stayed professional but carefully distant. When Carlos Leder visited Miami in early 1980, their meeting happened on Griselda's yacht, neutral territory where conversations could not be easily listened to. Your operation impresses me, Leder had admitted, watching the Miami skyline from the deck. You have built something special here, Griselda had smiled, accepting the compliment with the confidence of someone who knew their worth. Miami understands luxury and having fun. I simply give what the market wants. What she did not say was her growing belief that Miami represented the future of their business. While Colombia stayed the source, America's endless hunger for cocaine made cities like Miami the true centers of power in their industry. Griselda's foresight in setting herself up there early would prove helpful as the cocaine trade exploded throughout the early 1980s. As her business grew, so did the challenges of keeping it. The flood of cash needed more and more clever laundering operations through a network of front businesses, import companies, property investments, and retail stores. Griselda changed her cocaine profits into assets that looked legitimate. Money is like water, she explained to a small circle of her money advisors during a strategy meeting in one of her safe houses. It must flow to stay clean. Stuck money brings attention. Her understanding of money systems, mostly self-taught through watching and strategically hiring experts, let her operation manage millions of dollars with amazing discretion. While the police would later find dozens of her front businesses, many more stayed hidden. The personal dynamics inside her organization showed Griselda's complex character. She inspired fierce loyalty through a mix of generosity, fear, and a strange form of motherly authority. To those who served her well, she offered protection, wealth, and a sense of family. To those who betrayed her trust, the results were fast and typically final. Loyalty is not bought, she once told a gathering of her lieutenants. It is grown like faith. The religious pictures that decorated her homes were not just for show. Griselda kept a complex spiritual life, regularly talking with saints and keeping detailed shrines in her homes. She believed deeply in divine protection and fate, often giving her successes to spiritual guidance rather than her own ruthless intelligence. This spiritual side added another layer to the loyalty she commanded. Many in her organization shared her beliefs and saw her apparent divine protection as more proof of her right to lead. As 1980 came, bringing with it the famous Mariel boat lift that would dramatically change Miami's people and criminal scene, Griselda had already made herself a power unlike any the city had seen before. Her operation, though smaller than later legends would claim, worked with a precision and vision that set it apart from more chaotic criminal businesses. Miami is changing, Dario observed one evening as they watched a news report about the growing tensions in Cuba that would soon lead to the mass exit. More of our countrymen coming, more competition. Griselda had simply smiled, the confidence of someone who had already expected these changes clear in her expression. Change brings opportunity for people who are ready to take it, and we, my love, are always ready. This confidence was not just showing off. By setting up her wholesale distribution model early and building relationships all through Miami's power structures, Griselda had placed herself to handle the coming storm of competition and increased police attention, while other criminal organizations would fight bloody territory battles in the streets. Her operation would keep working with relative discretion, moving product and profits with careful efficiency. The foundation she laid during these early years in Miami, the network of safe houses, the distribution channels, the money laundering operations, and the strategic alliances would support an empire that would control the cocaine trade for years to come, cementing Griselda Blanco's place in the complicated history of organized crime. As she stood on her balcony that night in 1980, watching Miami's lights reflect on the dark water, Griselda felt a rare moment of happiness. Her son slept peacefully inside, her husband stood loyal beside her, and her empire grew stronger each day. The city that spread before her, unknowing and hungry for what she provided, had become both her kingdom and her canvas. Beautiful, is not it? Dario said quietly, following her look across the water. Yes, Griselda replied, but her eyes had already moved past the view, seeing possibilities and connections invisible to others. And it is only the beginning. The warm Miami breeze carried the smell of salt and sunscreen as tourists and locals walked through the shiny halls of Dadeland Mall. It was July 11th, 1979, a day that would forever change the landscape of South Florida and carve itself into the shared memory of a city on the edge of change. Inside the Crown Liquor Store, German Jimenez Paneso was having a casual talk with a business partner. At 46, Paneso had built a small empire in the growing cocaine trade, making connections all through Colombia and Miami. His tailored linen suit and gold watch spoke of his success, though he kept a relatively low profile compared to some of his peers. The liquor store served as an informal meeting place, a neutral ground where business could be discussed under the excuse of choosing fine drinks. Neither Paneso nor the handful of afternoon shoppers noticed the white van that pulled into the parking lot. The vehicle moved without hurry, finding a spot with a clear view of the liquor store entrance. Inside sat two men, their faces blank as they checked their weapons one last time. MAC-10 machine guns, small but terribly effective. Remember what the godmother said, the driver murmured to his companion. Make sure everyone knows it was her, the passenger nodded, his eyes cold. For La Madrina. When the two men came out from the van, they moved with practiced efficiency. They did not run, they did not shout. They simply walked into Crown Liquors and let loose hell. The quick bursts of automatic gunfire shattered the peaceful noise of business. Glass exploded, bottles broke, screams came as shoppers dove for cover. Paneso had only a moment of horrified recognition before the bullets found him, tearing through his body with mechanical precision. The whole event lasted less than 30 seconds. The gunmen went back to their van and disappeared into Miami traffic, leaving behind a scene that police would later describe as a war zone. 7 people lay wounded. 2, including Paneso, were dead. As emergency vehicles came to Dadeland Mall with sirens crying, Detective Robert Cruz of the Miami-Dade Police Department stood amid the destruction, his experienced eyes taking in details that would trouble him for years to come. When a young reporter asked him about the scene, Cruz's answer was grimly predicting the future. This was not just a hit, he said, his voice heavy with a bad feeling. This was a message. These are not just drug dealers anymore. These are cocaine cowboys. The phrase stuck, spreading through news reports and headlines across the nation. What few realized then was that this public killing was not just the first shot in a drug war. It was the announcement of a new reign of terror, planned by a woman who had already earned a chilling nickname in the criminal world, La Madrina, the godmother, miles away from the massacre in a fancy waterfront mansion in Miami Beach. Griselda Blanco got word of the successful hit at 36. She was already a legend in the cocaine trade, having clawed her way up from the slums of Medellin through a mix of ruthless ambition and strategic cruelty. Her small body and deceptively gentle features hid a mind of amazing cunning and a heart seemingly empty of mercy. "They are saying it is all over the news," reported Hora, one of her most trusted lieutenants. "The police are calling it the work of cocaine cowboys," Griselda smiled, taking a slow sip of champagne as she looked out at Biscayne Bay. "Let them call us whatever they want. By tomorrow, everyone who matters will know who really runs this city." The Dadeland Mall massacre marked a turning point in Miami's history. In the months that followed, the murder rate began a worrying climb that would eventually see it become 3 times higher. Emergency rooms filled with gunshot victims. The morgue needed refrigerated trucks to handle the overflow of bodies. And through it all, Griselda Blanco's organization grew with breathtaking speed. By early 1980, her operation was smuggling about 1,550 kilograms of cocaine into the United States every month, making total money of around $80 million. The scale was unheard of, but it was her methods that truly set her apart from her rivals. Griselda understood something basic about power, explained Miguel Cabrera, a former partner who later spoke against her. Fear is more valuable than money. Money buys loyalty until someone offers more. Fear buys silence forever. The fear she created was methodical and dramatic. While other drug lords might get rid of rivals quietly, Griselda made murder into a show. Her hitmen were the first to use motorcycle killers in Miami, a method she had seen in Colombia, but improved for American streets. The method was as efficient as it was terrifying. 2 men on a motorcycle would pull up next to a target's vehicle. The passenger would fire, and the driver would speed away through traffic where bigger vehicles could not follow. On a humid evening in October 1979, Raul Diaz, a mid-level distributor who had been taking profits for himself, was driving his Mercedes down Collins Avenue when a motorcycle pulled next to him at a stoplight. The passenger nodded politely before raising a pistol and firing 3 exact shots. By the time people nearby realized what had happened, the motorcycle had disappeared into the maze of Miami Beach streets. It was not just that she killed people, Detective Cruz would later say. It is that she wanted the killings to be seen. Each murder was a sign advertising her power. Car bombs became another mark of Blanco's organization. Unlike the quick efficiency of motorcycle hits, bombings sent a message of unavoidable doom. In December 1979, when Fernando Ruiz, a rival distributor, turned the key in his Cadillac, the explosion was heard 6 blocks away. The psychological effect spread through Miami's criminal ranks. No one was safe, not even in their most private spaces. Perhaps most frightening were the war wagons, vans changed with gun ports that let Blanco's hitmen spray entire streets with automatic fire. These mobile killing platforms brought the methods of guerrilla war to American suburbs. In the shadows of this growing violence, Griselda kept a complicated personal life. Her relationship with her 3 sons, Dixon, Uber, and Oswaldo, showed the contradictions that defined her. She gave them luxury, making sure they had the finest clothes, the most expensive toys, and private teachers, yet she also prepared them for the family business, showing them violence at an early age. She would show them photographs of her enemies who had been killed. Remembered a former household worker who asked to not be named. She told them, "This is what happens to people who betray the family." The boys would nod like she was teaching them table manners. In her Miami Beach mansion, Griselda held huge parties attended by corrupt officials, entertainers looking for the thrill of danger, and various figures from Miami's criminal world. At one such gathering in early 1980, a Colombian supplier named Eduardo Velázquez made the deadly mistake of questioning Griselda's judgment about a disputed territory. "Perhaps, Madrina, we should think about a more peaceful approach," he suggested. His voice lowered as they stood on her moonlit terrace. "The attention from authorities is becoming a problem," Griselda smiled, touching his arm with surprising gentleness. "Eduardo, you have always been a voice of reason. Walk with me to the dock. I want to show you something." The next morning, Velázquez's body was found floating in Biscayne Bay. A single bullet wound to the back of his head. The message was clear. There was no questioning La Madrina's authority. As 1980 went on, the size of Blanco's operation reached amazing levels. Her distribution network went beyond Miami to New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. She kept multiple processing labs where cocaine was prepared for street distribution, employing hundreds of workers who worked in shifts all day and night. The money logistics of her empire were equally impressive, with so much cash flowing in, often literally rooms filled with money needing counting machines. Griselda set up detailed money laundering operations. She bought real businesses, invested in property, and kept a network of bankers and lawyers who helped change drug profits into seemingly real assets. What made her operation different was the control of everything, explained D. Agent Michael Sullivan, who spent years building a case against her. She controlled everything from bringing it in to street-level selling. Most organizations specialized in one link of the chain. Griselda wanted the whole chain. This complete approach let her make profits as big as possible while making weak points as small as possible. If one part of the operation faced pressure from police, others could make up for it. When Coast Guard stops increased, she switched to airdrops. When certain distribution networks were found, she developed alternatives. By mid-1980, Griselda's personal fortune was guessed to be in the hundreds of millions. She owned properties all through Miami, a group of luxury vehicles, and a collection of jewelry that equaled museum collections. Her spending was legendary: $100,000 shopping trips, private jets for weekend trips, and parties where champagne flowed like water. Yet through all her wealth, Griselda never lost the survival skills formed during her poor childhood. She changed homes often, used several body doubles, and kept escape plans for every place she visited. Her paranoia reached to her inner circle. She would sometimes test the loyalty of her lieutenants by giving them false information and watching to see if it leaked. "Trust no one completely," was a saying she impressed upon her sons. Even those closest to you may betray you when the price is right. The human cost of Griselda's rise to power went far beyond her direct victims. Miami itself was changed. Neighborhoods once known for their peace became battlefields. Tourism went down as headlines about the murder capital of America spread across the country. Police agencies found themselves outgunned and outfunded by drug organizations filled with cash. What people do not understand is how the violence affected regular citizens, explained Maria Sanchez, who worked as a nurse in Jackson Memorial Hospital's emergency room during this time. "We were not just treating gunshot victims who were involved in the drug trade. We were treating children caught in crossfire, old people hit by stray bullets, witnesses who saw too much. The psychological effect on the community was equally damaging. Parents kept children inside. Businesses put in security systems and hired armed guards. A widespread feeling of being unsafe settled over the city like a poisonous cloud. By the fall of 1980, Griselda Blanco had reached a level of power and fame never seen before for a woman in the man-run world of international drug smuggling. Her organization was making nearly $1 billion every year. Her name was whispered with a mix of fear and awe all through South America and the United States. Yet the very visibility that helped her reputation also made her more and more weak. Police agencies, local police, FBI, were giving never-before-seen resources to bringing down the cocaine cowboys, with Griselda at the top of their list. As pressure built, Griselda's paranoia grew stronger. She started to see betrayal everywhere. Loyal lieutenants who had served her for years found themselves suddenly suspected. The smallest seen disrespect could start a too-big response. The power changed her, observed Jorge Ayala during later speaking in court. In the beginning, the violence had a purpose. It was business. By 1980, it had become personal. She killed not just for profit or protection, but sometimes simply because she could. The empire she had built through cunning, cruelty, and vision had changed not only her own life, but the very cloth of Miami society. The Dadeland massacre had announced her presence to the world, and the following wave of violence had made her reputation as the most frightening figure in the cocaine trade. What no one could guess, maybe not even Griselda herself, was how quickly empires built on blood and fear could fall apart, or how the legacy of the godmother would keep echoing through criminal history for decades to come. The Miami sun beat down without mercy on the city streets a February afternoon in 1982, but inside the small air-conditioned apartment in northwest Miami, Griselda Blanco sat in a leather armchair, her face lit by a beam of light coming through half-closed blinds. The smoke from her cigarette curled upward, dancing in the light before disappearing into the shadows that seemed to follow her everywhere. Her dark eyes, sharp and calculating, focused on Jorge Rivi Ayala, her most trusted hitman, as he stood before her, waiting for instructions. "Johnny Castro," she said, her voice low and steady, each word carrying the weight of a death sentence. "He has become a problem." Rivi nodded, understanding the unspoken command. Johnny Castro had been taking profits from their cocaine operations, a crime Griselda Blanco, known as the godmother of the Miami drug trade, never forgave. "Make it clean," she added, tapping ash from her cigarette. "Make it a message." The room fell silent, except for the soft hum of the air conditioner. Miami in the early 1980s was a battlefield. Cocaine was its money, and Griselda Blanco was its most ruthless general. At 39, she had already cut a bloody path from Colombia to New York to Miami, leaving a trail of bodies that had earned her another nickname, the Black Widow. 2 days later, on a quiet Miami street, Rivi's motorcycle pulled next to Johnny Castro's car. What should have been a precise killing instead became a terrible mistake. The bullets that were meant for Castro also hit his 2-year-old son, Johnny Jr., who was sitting in the back seat unseen by the killer. When news of the child's death reached Griselda at her Miami Beach mansion, people who saw it would later remember a reaction that chilled even her tough partners. According to Rivi Ayala, in talks later recorded during his cooperation with authorities, Griselda had been almost happy. "The kid was in the way," she reportedly said, dismissing the toddler's death with a wave of her hand. "These things happen. This coldness was not surprising to those who knew her well. Griselda had long believed in a way of thinking that innocent people getting hurt was simply the cost of doing business in their world. What mattered was the message: cross Griselda Blanco, and not even your family was safe. The killing of Johnny Castro and his son sent waves through Miami's criminal world. It was not just the cruelty of the hit, but the ignoring of an unwritten rule that had before kept children off limits for the police, particularly the newly formed CENTAC 26 Central Tactical Unit that had been created specifically to target major drug smugglers. The Castro killing showed a new level of violence that needed a response. Detective Robert Palumbo of the Miami-Dade Police Department had been following Blanco for months. In his small office, walls covered with surveillance photos and network diagrams, he added the details of the Castro hit to his growing file. "She is getting worse," he told his partner, sliding the crime scene photos across the desk. "This is not just business for her anymore. She is enjoying it." His partner nodded grimly, studying the images. The cocaine cowboy wars are one thing, but children, even for Miami, this is something else. What neither detective fully understood yet was that for Griselda, business and pleasure had always been mixed together. Violence was not just a tool, it was her signature, her brand in a marketplace full of dangerous competitors. By June 1982, the summer heat had settled over Miami like a damp blanket in a normal home in a neighborhood. Alfredo and Griselda Lorenzo were putting their children to bed, unaware that they had become the next targets on Griselda Blanco's list. The Lorenzos had made what would prove to be a deadly mistake. They had knowledge of Griselda's operations and were rumored to be thinking about cooperating with authorities. In Griselda's world, even the suspicion of betrayal deserved the worst response. That evening, as the children were taken to their rooms, men entered the Lorenzo home. What followed was described by investigators as one of the most cold-blooded killings they had ever seen. Alfredo and Griselda were forced to kneel in their living room, in full view of their children, before being shot in the head. The children's screams told neighbors who called police. By the time officers arrived, the killers were gone, leaving behind a scene that would trouble even experienced detectives for years to come. When Detective Palumbo arrived at the scene, the children were huddled together, being comforted by a neighbor. Their small faces, marked with tears, told a story of innocence destroyed in an instant. Who would do this in front of kids? His partner whispered, looking at the destruction. Palumbo's jaw tightened. She would. Back at her Miami Beach compound, Griselda got confirmation of the hit with satisfaction. Sitting by her pool, the Miami skyline shining in the distance, she sipped champagne with her current lover, a young Colombian named Dario Sepulveda. "It is done," Rivy told her. Standing at a respectful distance, Griselda nodded, a slight smile playing at her lips. "Good. Let everyone know what happens to people who talk," Dario, holding their baby son, Michael, in his arms, watched the exchange with a mix of interest and unease. He had met Griselda in Colombia, becoming first her bodyguard, then her lover, and finally the father of her youngest son. Their relationship was passionate but unstable, marked by Griselda's extreme jealousy and Dario's growing discomfort with her business methods. Was it necessary? He asked quietly after Rivy had left. Griselda's eyes hardened as she turned to him. "Everything I do is necessary," she replied coldly. "The children will learn early what loyalty means. It is a valuable lesson." Dario looked down at Michael, peacefully sleeping in his arms, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. He had known who Griselda was when they became involved. Her reputation in Medellin was legendary, But seeing her operations firsthand in Miami was making him think again about their future together. What Dario did not know was that his worries about Griselda's methods would soon be the least of his problems. The Lorenzo killings had made police look harder at Blanco's organization. Centac 26, led by experienced D agents and Miami-Dade detectives, was closing in, gathering evidence, and turning lower-level partners into informants. The summer of 1982 bled into fall, and as the year turned to 1983, Griselda Blanco's empire kept doing well despite the building pressure from police. Her cocaine distribution network stretched across the United States with Miami as its center, making millions in profits that were laundered through a complex web of front businesses and offshore accounts. But within her personal life, cracks were starting to show. Her relationship with Dario Sepulveda had gotten much worse. What had once been passionate had turned poisonous, their arguments becoming more and more frequent and violent. The main point of fighting was their son, Michael, now a toddler, Dario, more and more bothered by Griselda's business and the environment around their son, had started to say he wanted to return to Colombia with Michael. For Griselda, this was unthinkable. Michael was not just her son, he was her heir, the future of her criminal family. In a huge mansion in Coral Gables, one of several properties Griselda kept all through Miami. The couple's most heated fight happened on a humid evening in July 1983. "I am taking him back to Medellin," Dario declared, standing firm in the fancy living room where Griselda held her meetings. "This is no place for a child to grow up," Griselda, dressed in a silk robe and covered with diamonds, laughed bitterly. "You think I would let you take my son? You think you can just walk away from me? Look around you, Griselda." Dario pointed to the luxurious surroundings. The armed guards visible through the windows. The constant parade of criminal partners coming and going. "Is this what you want for Michael? To grow up surrounded by death?" Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "He will grow up to be strong, to be feared and respected. What would you teach him in Medellin? To be weak? To be human?" "To be human," Dario countered, his voice rising. "Something you have forgotten how to be." The argument grew worse, with Griselda threatening and Dario standing his ground in a way few men ever dared with her. By the end of the night, Dario had packed his and Michael's things, and despite Griselda's threats, he left for Colombia with their son. For those who knew Griselda, this was not just a family fight. It was a declaration of war. No one took anything from Griselda Blanco, especially not her own child. In September 1983, just 2 months after leaving Miami, Dario Sepulveda was driving through the streets of Medellin with Michael when several gunmen on motorcycles surrounded his car in a shower of bullets that echoed through the Colombian city. Dario was killed instantly. Michael, amazingly unhurt, was quickly taken away by partners loyal to Griselda. Within days, the boy was back in Miami, returned to his mother's arms. Griselda greeted him with tears and tender words, holding him as if he were the most precious thing in her world, which in her own twisted way he was, though she was never formally charged with planning Dario's murder. Few in either Miami or Medellin had any doubts about who had ordered the hit. The pattern was too familiar. Anyone who crossed Griselda Blanco, even someone she had once loved, paid the highest price. She got what she wanted, Detective Palumbo said grimly when news of Sepulveda's death reached Miami. She always does. The special task force combining resources from the D, FBI, and local police had been carefully building cases against key figures in Blanco's organization. Several of her lieutenants had been arrested, and rumors of grand jury investigations were going around, Griselda ever the survivor. saw the changing situation. Miami had been good to her, a city she had helped change into the cocaine capital of America. But it was time to move on. With her usual foresight, she had already set up operations in California, seeing the West Coast as the next frontier for her cocaine empire. In November 1983, Griselda Blanco quietly moved to Southern California. Settling into a fancy estate in Orange County, she brought with her a smaller, more trusted circle of partners, including Michael and her older sons from previous relationships, who had been learning the family business under her teaching. California represented not just a new market, but a fresh start. Away from the intense watch of Miami authorities, Griselda hoped to rebuild and expand, changing her operation to the different dynamics of the West Coast drug trade. But if she thought she had left her troubles behind in Miami, she was wrong. The D, particularly agents who had been following her through Centec 26, had expected her move. Watch was set up almost immediately, with agents watching her new home, tracking her movements, and mapping her new California network. Agent James Peterson moved from Miami specifically to continue the chase of Blanco, set up a watch post in a plain apartment with a clear view of her estate. "She is smart," he told his new partner as they took photographs of visitors coming and going from Griselda's home. "Adaptable. That is what makes her so dangerous and so hard to catch," his partner, a veteran of the DEA's Los Angeles office, nodded. Her reputation came before her. The local dealers are either terrified or trying to get close to her. That is her playbook, Peterson explained, adjusting his camera lens. Fear and opportunity. She offers both. Inside her new home, Griselda was indeed planning her next moves. The spacious living room had been changed into a strategy center, with maps of Los Angeles and surrounding counties spread across tables, marked with possible distribution points and territories. "We need to be smarter here," she told her gathered lieutenants, her finger tracing routes across the map. Miami was chaotic. Here we will be more controlled, less visible violence. This was not a moral change, but a tactical one. Griselda had learned from Miami that too much blood brought too much attention. In California, she would still remove obstacles, but with greater care. What Griselda did not realize was how much the scene of drug enforcement had changed. The Reagan government's increase of the war on drugs had given agencies like the D never-before-seen resources and authority. The cocaine epidemic had become a national priority, and high-profile smugglers like Griselda Blanco were main targets. As 1983 ended, Griselda Blanco, the godmother, the Black Widow, the woman responsible for countless deaths, including those of Johnny Castro and his baby son, Alfredo, and Griselda Lorenzo, and her own lover, Dario Sepulveda, stayed free, but increasingly trapped. The net was tightening, with federal agents building their case carefully, turning partners, gathering evidence, and watching her every move. In her quieter moments, often late at night, as she looked out over the California view from her balcony, Griselda maybe thought about the path that had led her here. From the slums of Medellin to the top of criminal power, her life had been defined by a relentless drive to survive and control. The bodies she had left in her path, enemies, lovers, innocent bystanders, were simply markers on that journey. But even Griselda Blanco, who had escaped death and justice so many times, must have felt that her story was nearing its most difficult chapter. The question was not if she would face punishment for her crimes, but when and from which of her many enemies the law rival smugglers. Or maybe even those closest to her who had seen her ability for betrayal firsthand. As 1984 began, the cocaine godmother of Miami prepared for what would be the next bloody part of her remarkable and terrible life story. In the quiet moments before dawn, when the city of Irvine, California, still slept, federal agents moved with practiced precision through the shadows. The date was February 17, 1985, a day that would mark the end of one chapter and the start of another in the story of Griselda Blanco. The woman they looked for had earned many names over the years. La Madrina, the Black Widow, the Cocaine Godmother. But on this particular morning, they found something unexpected. The agents had expected a fight, maybe even violence. What they discovered instead was a middle-aged woman sitting quietly in a normal home. Reading a Bible, her dark hair framed a face that had once been beautiful in its youth, but now carried the weight of years lived dangerously. Her eyes, when they met those of the agents, showed neither surprise nor fear, only a strange, resigned acceptance. As though she had long expected this moment, Griselda closed the Bible slowly, placing a finger between the pages to mark her place. "I have been expecting you," she said, her voice carrying the thick accent of her Colombian homeland, though softened by years in the United States. Let me finish this verse. The lead D-agent, a veteran of many high-profile arrests, would later say that in all his years of service, he had never seen someone so famous appear so calm in the moment of their capture. It was as though two Griseldas existed, the ruthless queenpin who had planned a cocaine empire, and this thoughtful woman finding comfort in Scripture. The arrest in Irvine marked the high point of years of investigation, countless wiretaps, watch operations, and the gradual unraveling of a network that had once seemed unbreakable. For the authorities, it was a victory. For Griselda, it was just a change. As they led her away in handcuffs, a neighbor peeked through window blinds, watching the scene happen with wide eyes. The quiet woman who had lived among them, who had nodded politely when passing on the street, was being shown as something else entirely. The neighbor would later tell reporters, she seemed so ordinary. Maybe a little quiet, but ordinary. Ordinary was the last word anyone in law enforcement would use to describe Griselda Blanco. By the time of her arrest, legends had already formed around her. Some true, some exaggerated, all adding to an aura of frightening mystery that had helped her keep control over her empire. The journey from Irvine to the Southern District of New York, where she would face trial, was done under heavy security. During the flight, Griselda sat silently, occasionally glancing out the window at the passing view below. One marshal assigned to her transport would later remember how she had asked for a cup of tea and thanked him with unexpected politeness when he gave it to her. "It is strange," the marshal told his wife that night, "to see someone thank you so genuinely when you are taking them to what might be a life sentence." By June 1985, the courthouse in Manhattan had become the stage for what promised to be one of the most important drug trials of the decade. The prosecution had put together a strong case built on money records, watch, and most importantly, witnesses who had once been part of Griselda's inner circle, but now stood ready to speak against her. Chief among these was Carmen Cabanas, known in the streets as the Cheese Queen, a nickname earned through her role in the money operations of the cocaine trade. Cabanas had been Griselda's confidant, her money handler, and now her possible downfall. The two women had first met in the mid-1970s, when Griselda was setting up her foothold in the Miami drug scene. Carmen had been working as an accountant for a real business that, unknown to her at the time, served as a front for laundering drug money. Her skill with numbers had caught Griselda's attention. "She came up to me after work one day," Carmen would later say in court, her voice steady despite the weight of the courtroom's attention. "She said she admired people who understood that numbers tell stories most people cannot read. She offered me 3 times my salary to come work for her directly. Their relationship had changed over the years, from employer-employee to something like friendship, at least as close to friendship as someone like Griselda let herself experience. They had shared meals, exchanged gifts on birthdays, discussed books and movies. Carmen had even been godmother to one of Griselda's sons. Now, in the clean environment of the courtroom, that relationship had changed into something else entirely. Carmen sat on the witness stand, hands held tightly in her lap, avoiding direct eye contact with the woman she was helping to prosecute. "Ms. Cabanas," the prosecutor began, his voice echoing in the quiet courtroom, "could you please describe for the jury the structure of NUMS? Blanco's organization as you understood it." Carmen cleared her throat. Griselda believed in keeping things separate. People only knew what they needed to know for their specific job, but she kept the overall vision to herself. She used to say that an empire is like a pyramid, broad at the base, but with only room for one at the top. The trial happened over several weeks, showing the detailed details of an operation that had moved billions of dollars worth of cocaine into the United States. Carmen's speaking was careful, backed by ledgers and money records that painted the picture of huge wealth flowing through carefully built channels made to avoid being found. Through the whole process, Griselda kept a calm manner. She sat beside her lawyers in tailored suits that hid her current situation, occasionally making notes on a legal pad or leaning over to whisper something to her counsel. Those who expected to see a monster were instead met with a woman who appeared more like a stern business executive than a drug lord. During breaks in the trial, Griselda was returned to a holding cell where she would often read, sometimes the Bible she had been found with during her arrest, other times novels or poetry. One guard noted that she seemed especially fond of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the Colombian author, whose magical realism maybe reflected something of her own extraordinary life. The relationship between Griselda and Carmen became a main point of the trial. The defense tried to paint Carmen as an opportunist who had willingly taken part in illegal activities and was now saving herself by betraying her former employer. The prosecution placed her as someone who had been pulled into Griselda's world and was now bravely standing up against a powerful and dangerous figure. The truth, as is often the case, likely lay somewhere between these stories. During cross-examination, Griselda's lawyer came up to Carmen with measured steps. "Miss Cabanas, you spoke earlier about your close relationship with Miss Blanco. Would you say you considered her a friend?" Carmen paused, her eyes briefly moving toward Griselda before returning to the lawyer. "I thought I did, yes. And yet here you are speaking against her. What changed?" Carmen's answer came after a long wait, understanding what we were really doing. When you are in it, you see the money, the power, the respect. You do not see the other side. In a rare show of emotion, Griselda's expression hardened at these words. Those watching closely might have seen her knuckles turn white as she gripped the edge of the table before her. As July came near, the prosecution presented its final witnesses and evidence. The case they had built was complete, connecting Griselda not just to drug smuggling, but to the detailed money structure that had let her operation work for so long. On July 9, 1985, the jury came back with their decision after less than a day of talking guilty of planning to sell drugs. The courtroom stayed silent as the decision was read, except for the soft sound of Griselda's breathing, which seemed to catch for a moment before resuming its steady rhythm. The sentencing would not come until November, leaving Griselda in a state of waiting. During these months, she spent her time in detention, reading a lot and, according to some stories, Developing a deeper interest in religious texts, she got few visitors. Her sons were themselves either in hiding or facing their own legal troubles. And most of those who had once claimed loyalty had disappeared when fortunes turned. One person who did visit was a former partner named Raul, who had managed to avoid being involved in the case. Their meeting, watched by guards, seemed tense at first, but slowly changed into what appeared to be a real conversation between old friends. "You know," Griselda reportedly told him, "in all the years, all the money, all the power, I never slept as well as I did when I was a girl in Cartagena before any of this began." Raul nodded. "Do you regret it? The path you chose?" Griselda thought about this for a long moment. Regret is a luxury for people who have other options. I did what I needed to survive, and then I did what I wanted because I could. The only thing I truly regret is not seeing my boys grow into men who could make different choices. On November 8, 1985, Griselda Blanco returned to the courtroom for sentencing. She had chosen to wear a simple black dress rather than the power suits of the trial. Her hair pulled back tightly from her face. When given the chance to speak before sentencing, she rose slowly. "Your Honor," she began, her accent more pronounced than usual, maybe due to emotion. "I stand before you as someone who has been shown as a monster. Maybe parts of that showing are deserved. I have lived a life outside the boundaries of what society thinks is acceptable. But I ask you to remember that monsters are not born. They are created by situations and choices." The judge listened without expression, his face showing nothing of his thoughts. "I came to this country looking for what everyone looks for: opportunity, security, a future for my children. The paths open to me were few, and the one I chose led me here. I accept that there must be results for my actions. I only ask that, in deciding those results, you see me as a complete person, a mother, a survivor, a woman who made terrible choices. But who is more than the sum of those choices?" Whether her words had any effect on the judge's decision is unknown. The sentence was given with the same detached professionalism that had marked the whole proceeding. 15 years in federal prison and a fine of $25,000. As Griselda was led from the courtroom, a journalist there would later write that she walked with the dignified acceptance of a queen being led to exile, not defeated, just temporarily removed from power. The months following her sentencing saw Griselda's lawyers file appeals mainly on the grounds that her right to a fast trial had been broken. These efforts would finally prove unsuccessful, with the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit supporting her conviction in 1988. During this time, rumors started to spread, whispers that even from behind bars, Griselda was planning. Maybe the most persistent of these rumors suggested a bold plan to kidnap John F. Kennedy Jr. As pressure for her release, this tale, later made popular in a 2008 documentary and through various media stories, has never been proven with believable evidence. Those who knew Griselda best suggested that while she was certainly capable of bold and ruthless action, such a plan would have been unusually reckless for someone who had built her empire on calculated moves and careful strategy. What is known for sure is that Griselda adjusted to prison life with the same toughness she had shown all through her remarkable and controversial life. She made routines, kept up her reading, and according to some stories, found a measure of peace in religious practice that had escaped her in freedom. A prison chaplain who interacted with her during these early years would later remember, "She never discussed her past with me directly, but she once said something I have thought about often since. She said, 'Father, power is like a current that carries you along. You think you are steering, but really you are just trying not to drown.' As 1985 gave way to 1986, and the world outside kept its relentless forward motion, Griselda Blanco, once one of the most powerful and frightening figures in the international drug trade, began the long, slow process of serving her sentence. Her empire taken apart, her freedom gone, but her legend only starting to grow in the heart of Miami, where the sun kissed the ocean with golden colors each evening. Whispers of a name traveled through the streets like a gentle breeze carrying secrets. Griselda Blanco, the name alone made the air go still. Conversations stop, and eyes look around nervously. It was the early 1990s, and the woman known as La Madrina, the godmother, had built an empire that stretched across continents. Yet she moved like a shadow, rarely seen but always felt. The Miami skyline shone against the darkening sky as Detective Robert Martinez sat in his unmarked car, watching the entrance of a fancy restaurant where partners of the Blanco organization were known to meet. He had been following Griselda's operation for years, watching as she planned her business with calculating precision, while keeping a careful distance from the day-to-day operations. Unlike the flashy drug lords who showed off their wealth with gaudy displays, Griselda understood the power of being invisible. "She is smart," Martinez muttered to his partner, Detective Williams, as they watched men in expensive suits entering the place. "Three sons running different branches of the operation, and she is pulling the strings from behind the curtain." Williams nodded, taking a sip of his cold coffee. "And yet she is losing them one by one." It was true. Between 1989 and 1994, Griselda had experienced the deepest loss a mother could suffer: the deaths of 3 of her older sons. Each murder had sent waves through the criminal world of Miami, Colombia, and beyond. Some whispered it was karma. Others claimed it was rival organizations getting even. But everyone agreed on one thing: even in a world built on violence, there was something especially sad about a mother living longer than her children. In her fancy home, hidden behind high walls and lush tropical gardens, Griselda sat alone in her study, surrounded by photographs of her sons, Dixon, Uber, and Oswaldo. Their faces looked back at her from silver frames. Young men with her eyes, her determination. The room was strangely quiet, except for the gentle ticking of an old clock and the occasional rustle of papers as she looked over business, reports brought to her by trusted lieutenants. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she commanded, her voice carrying the weight of authority, even though it was soft. Jorge Rivi Ayala, her most trusted hitman, stepped into the room, tall and strong with sharp features and calculating eyes. Rivi had been with Griselda for years, doing her orders with ruthless efficiency. "The shipment arrived safely," he told her, standing respectfully at a distance. "And the message was delivered to the Ochoa family, as you asked." Griselda nodded, her face showing no emotion, though her mind figured out what each move in this dangerous chess game she played meant. "And what of the investigation? What are they saying downtown?" Rivi shifted a little. "They are building a case. Detective Martinez has been gathering people's stories, money records. They believe they have enough to move soon." A small smile played at the corners of Griselda's lips. "Let them believe what they want. We have survived worse storms." But behind her confident front, Griselda felt the pressure building. The loss of her sons had created weak points in her organization that she struggled to fix. Enemies sensed weakness, and police circled closer each day. The empire she had built from nothing, from the desperate streets of Medellin to the shining coastline of Miami, was starting to show cracks in its foundation. Later that evening, as Miami's nightlife pulsed with energy, Griselda sat on her terrace overlooking Biscayne Bay. The water reflected the city lights, creating a mirror image of the world she had conquered. She sipped slowly from a glass of aged Colombian rum, letting herself a rare moment of thinking. Her journey had been extraordinary by any measure. Born into poverty in Colombia, she had clawed her way to the top of a man-run criminal system through a mix of ruthless ambition, strategic thinking, and an understanding of human psychology that was almost supernatural. Where others saw obstacles, Griselda saw pathways. Where others paused, she struck decisively. The telephone rang. Interrupting her thoughts, her remaining son, Michael, was calling from Colombia, where he had been watching over operations. "Mama," his voice came through the line, a mix of respect and urgency. "I have been hearing things. The Miami-Dade prosecutors are preparing something big. You should think about leaving for a while." Griselda took another sip of rum, watching as a yacht moved silently across the bay. "This is my home now, Michael. I do not run from shadows. These are not shadows, Mama. They have witnesses. They have Rivy's people talking." A chill went through Griselda that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. Rivy had been with her through everything, her most loyal soldier. The thought that his partners might be turning was disturbing. "I will handle it," she said firmly. "Focus on our business there. I need you safe." After hanging up, Griselda called for her security detail. "Bring Rivy to me tomorrow morning. We need to discuss some worries." But Rivy never made it to that meeting. By dawn, Miami-Dade police had moved in, arresting several key members of Griselda's organization. The net was tightening. In the offices of the Miami-Dade prosecutor, a team worked through the night, preparing what they believed would be the case of their careers. Assistant State Attorney Barbara Reynolds spread documents across a large table, building a story of murder, drug smuggling, and money laundering that covered decades. "We have got her," she said to her colleague, Miguel Santos. "3 murders we can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. The story from Ayala's crew gives us the connection we need." Santos nodded, though his expression stayed cautious. "If we can keep the witnesses safe, these people have a way of disappearing when it matters most." Reynolds tapped the folder confidently. "Rivy is our ace. He was her right hand. He knows everything." By 1994, the case the Miami-Dade prosecutors had built was strong. The charges said Griselda Blanco was responsible for 3 murders, and the state said it would try to get the death penalty. The news sent shockwaves through Miami's criminal scene. Madrina, who had seemed untouchable for so long, was facing the electric chair in her cell at the detention center. Griselda kept the same calm manner that had marked her rule. She received visitors with dignity, spoke respectfully to the guards, and spent hours in quiet thinking or reading books sent by her remaining family. To those watching, it might have seemed she was at peace with her fate. The reality was far more complicated. "They have nothing but the word of traitors and liars," she told her lawyer, Martin Goldstein, during one of their meetings. "Men who would say anything to save themselves." Goldstein, a veteran defense lawyer who had represented some of Miami's most famous criminals, adjusted his glasses and spoke honestly. "Griselda, the prosecution has Rivy. He was there for everything. His story alone could be enough." For a brief moment, something flashed in Griselda's eyes, a glimpse of the ferocity that had made her legendary before she regained her calm. "Then we must be prepared for every possibility." As the case went through early hearings, an unexpected development changed the momentum. Jorge Rivy Ayala, the prosecution's star witness, became involved in a scandal that threatened to ruin the whole case. It came out that Ayala had been having phone sex conversations with secretaries from the prosecutor's office. A stunning breaking of rules that questioned the honesty of the prosecution's handling of their key witness. The discovery sent the prosecutor's office into crisis mode. Barbara Reynolds found herself facing not only the challenge of prosecuting a famous criminal, but also handling a public relations disaster that threatened to destroy years of investigative work. "This cannot be happening," she said to Santos as they looked at records of the inappropriate calls. "Everything we have built, messed up by this silliness." Santos shook his head in disbelief. "The defense will have a field day. They will claim witness tampering, improper influence, anything to make Ayala's story not believable." He was right. Goldstein moved aggressively, filing papers challenging if Ayala's story could be used and questioning the prosecution's methods. The case that had seemed so solid started to show big cracks in the quiet of her cell. Griselda got the news of this development with outward calm, though inside her mind worked furiously, judging this unexpected turn of fortune. She had always believed in a mix of strategy and fate, figuring out every move while admitting that sometimes the universe itself stepped in mysterious ways. As the case against her weakened, talks began between the prosecution and defense, the state facing the possible collapse of their case against one of the most important criminal figures in Florida history, started to think about alternatives to a trial that might now end without a result. For Griselda, these years of legal battles were set against the background of deep personal loss. The deaths of her sons had changed her in ways that even she did not fully understand. There were moments alone in her cell at night when the front of the untouchable godmother fell apart, leaving only a mother who had lost her children. On October 16th, 1998, after years of legal moving, Griselda Blanco appeared in court one last time. The courtroom was packed with journalists, police officials who had spent careers chasing her, and curious members of the public, eager to glimpse the legendary figure. Dressed simply but elegantly in a navy blue suit, her hair pulled back in a neat bun, Griselda stood before Judge Harold Morrison with perfect posture and unwavering look. "Your Honor," Goldstein addressed the court, "we have reached an agreement with the state, Ms. Blanco is ready to enter a plea of guilty to 3 counts of second-degree murder. The terms of the agreement were announced together 20-year sentences with credit for time already served." Griselda Blanco had avoided the electric chair, but would stay imprisoned for many more years. When asked if she wished to address the court, Griselda spoke briefly, her voice steady. "I accept responsibility for my actions and the pain they have caused. I have lost 3 sons to violence. I understand suffering. Whether this was real regret or calculated performance stayed a matter of guess for those there." Detective Martinez, watching from the back of the courtroom, thought he saw something real in her words. A tiredness, perhaps, or the wisdom that comes only through terrible loss. As Griselda was led away to begin serving her sentence, rumors already swirled about the true size of her hidden fortune. Guesses ranged wildly from $500 million to $2 billion, hidden away in accounts across the globe. No official check had ever confirmed these numbers, and Griselda herself never spoke publicly about her money empire. Similarly persistent were the whispers about her possible connection to the Kennedy family tragedy. The guess about a JFK Jr. plot came back during this time, though it stayed in the area of conspiracy theory rather than proven fact. Behind the high walls of the correctional place, Griselda adjusted to her new reality with the same toughness that had marked her rise to power. She became known among inmates and staff alike for her quiet dignity, her huge reading habits, and her willingness to offer advice to younger women who found themselves in jail. "You have made mistakes," she told a young drug offender who shared her cell block in late 2000. "But mistakes do not define your whole story unless you let them." The years passed, marked by the changing seasons, visible from the small window of her cell, and the slowly shrinking list of visitors as former partners moved on, died, or simply forgot. Through it all, Griselda kept regular contact with her surviving son, Michael, their conversations carefully watched, but still forming a lifeline to the world outside. By 2004, having served about 19 years total between her various times of being locked up, Griselda Blanco's legal journey in the United States was nearing its end. In June of that year, she was let out from federal custody and immediately taken into the hands of immigration officials. As a non-citizen convicted of serious crimes, her deportation to Colombia was processed quickly. On a warm summer morning, Griselda Blanco got on a plane going to Bogota, returning to the country of her birth under situations far different from those she might have imagined at the height of her power. At 61 years old, La Madrina was beginning yet another chapter in her extraordinary life, leaving behind a legacy that would keep fascinating, frightening, and captivating long after her departure from American shores. In the quiet hours of a late summer evening, when the Colombian air hung heavy with the smell of rain-washed streets and blooming jacaranda, an old woman made her way through the fancy neighborhood of El Poblado in Medellin. The glow of streetlights cast long shadows as she moved with unhurried steps, her face weathered by time and experience, eyes that had seen the rise and fall of empires, though not the kind found in history books. Her name was whispered with a mix of fear and respect all through Colombia and beyond. Griselda Blanco, La Madrina, the Black Widow, the cocaine godmother, a woman who had once commanded an empire built on white powder and blood, who had planned murders with the same casual precision with which she now chose fruits at the local market. To the younger people of El Poblado, she was just another grandmother, maybe a bit more quiet than most, her accent hinting at years spent in the United States. Few recognized her as the planner of one of the most violent drug operations in history, a pioneer who had cut a red path for the male drug lords who would follow in her steps. Griselda had returned to Medellin years before, slipping back into the city that had birthed her ambition, like a ghost returning to haunt familiar halls. The Colombia she returned to was not the one she had left. The cartels had broken and reformed, the violence had changed, and the shadows in which she had once moved with such deadly grace were now occupied by new hunters. But Griselda Blanco was a survivor, through decades of bloodshed, through multiple husbands who had met violent ends, through prison and deportation. She had endured. Now, in her later years, she claimed to have found forgiveness in religion, showing herself as a born-again Christian, looking for forgiveness for sins too many to count. On that particular evening in early September 2012, Griselda moved through the streets with the same watchfulness that had kept her alive through decades of enemies and betrayals. Her eyes, dark and alert, despite her 69 years, scanned her surroundings with practiced ease. The neighborhood of El Poblado offered an appearance of security with its fancy apartments and trendy restaurants. But Griselda knew better than most that safety was an illusion. Particularly for someone with her history, she paused outside a small butcher shop, its windows showing cuts of meat arranged with careful precision. A normal errand for most, but for Griselda, every public appearance was a calculated risk. She had enemies, countless enemies, people who had lost loved ones to her orders, rivals who remembered her control, authorities who had never managed to make all charges stick. But time had passed, and maybe she thought, so had the thirst for revenge. Inside the shop, the butcher recognized her immediately, not as a famous criminal, but as a regular customer who preferred her meat cut in specific ways, and who always paid in cash. "Dona, the usual today?" he asked, reaching for a cleaver. "Si, per favor," Griselda replied, her voice carrying the rasp of years and cigarettes. "And maybe some of the sausage my grandson likes," the butcher nodded. Getting to work, Griselda watched his hands, the swift, sure movements of the blade. In another life, she had employed men skilled with different kinds of blades, the purposes far removed from preparing dinner. As she waited, her mind drifted to her sons, those lost to the life she had chosen for them, and those who remained. Michael, her youngest, had managed to carve out a life away from the shadows of her empire. He visited sometimes, bringing her grandson, a boy untouched by the blood that stained his family tree. In these visits, Griselda found a strange peace, a glimpse of what ordinary life might have been. The butcher wrapped her purchases in paper, securing them with string. "Your grandson, he is well?" he asked, making the kind of small talk expected in neighborhood shops. "Growing too fast," Griselda replied with a small smile that softened the hard lines of her face. "Children always do." She paid and thanked him, taking the package and stepping back into the early evening air. The streets were quieter now, locals going back to their homes or gathering in restaurants. Griselda paused, adjusting her grip on her purchase. She never saw the motorcycle come near, ever heard the engine over the background sounds of the neighborhood. The first sign of danger was the sudden silence that fell, as if the world held its breath. 2 shots, precise, professional. The kind of hit she herself might have ordered in her best days. The bullets found their mark with deadly accuracy, striking her in the head. Griselda Blanco, who had survived decades of war in the drug trade, who had ordered countless similar killings, fell to the pavement outside the butcher shop, her life's blood mixing with the rainwater in the gutters of Medellin. The motorcycle disappeared into the maze of streets, the killers anonymous in their helmets, faceless instruments of payback or justice, depending on one's view. They used the very method Griselda had pioneered the motorcycle killing. Quick, public, and nearly impossible to prevent. In the chaotic time after, as curious onlookers gathered and police sirens cried in the distance, the butcher came out from his shop, crossing himself at the sight of his customer lying motionless on the pavement. "Dios mío," he whispered. The package she had prepared for her still held in her hand, the paper now stained red. News of Griselda Blanco's death spread through Medellin like wildfire, then across Colombia, and finally to the United States, where she had built and lost her empire. Former partners, enemies, and police officials got the news with a complicated mix of emotions, closure, being proven right, and for some, a strange emptiness, as if the final chapter of a dark story had at last been written. In Miami, a city she had once terrified, retired D agents who had chased her raised glasses in grim satisfaction. In New York, where her organization had set up crucial distribution networks, aging gangsters nodded at the news, admitting the symmetry of her end. And in the Colombian prisons, where former members of her organization served their sentences, inmates marked her passing with a respect mixed with fear, even in death. The investigation into her murder went on with the quick motions expected for any killing, but with none of the urgency that might go with the death of a normal citizen. The case file would eventually join countless others in the records of unsolved killings in Colombia, a country still healing from decades of drug violence. The identities of her killers and whoever had paid for the hit stayed hard to find. Though ideas were many, some pointed to surviving family members of her victims, particularly those of the young boy killed in a drive-by shooting in Miami, an innocent person hurt in a failed attempt on his father's life, a hit Griselda had allegedly ordered. Others suggested former business rivals who had never forgotten old problems or maybe younger criminal elements, getting rid of a possible threat, however small. Michael Blanco got the news of his mother's death while in the United States. The son, who had tried to distance himself from his mother's bloody legacy, found himself pushed back into the spotlight, forced to face the complicated reality of grieving for a woman both loved and feared. In interviews given years later, he would speak of her with a complicated mix of affection and admission of her crimes, insisting that opposite to popular belief, she had left behind little in the way of hidden wealth. People think there are millions hidden away somewhere, he would tell a documentary filmmaker, his eyes showing the weight of his family history. But that is just another myth. The money was spent, taken, or lost long ago. In the days following her death, as Griselda's body lay in a Medellin morgue, waiting for the formalities of death in a country where she had both thrived and hidden, the legend of La Madrina began its change. No longer a living, breathing threat, she became something maybe more powerful, a symbol, a warning tale, a dark legend of a woman who had defied every normal way of her time and her criminal world. Filmmakers, authors, and musicians found in her story a compelling story of ruthless ambition and brutal result. The documentary Cocaine Cowboys had already set her place in criminal history, showing her as a figure of almost mythical size. A Lifetime movie would follow. Then a Netflix series titled simply Griselda, each version adding layers to the myth, blurring the already unclear line between the woman and the legend. Even in the world of hip-hop, her influence echoed with Griselda Records, taking her name as a symbol of uncompromising authenticity and street credibility. Her methods, her style, her very existence as a female kingpin in a man-run criminal world made sure that long after her blood had been washed from the streets of El Poblado, Griselda Blanco would stay a figure of fascination and fear. The truth of who she had been in those final years, a sorry sinner looking for forgiveness, a retired criminal living off illegally gotten money, or something in between died with her on that September evening. What remained was the complicated legacy of a woman who had risen from the slums of Medellin to become one of the most feared criminal operators in history, who had lived longer than most of her peers, only to fall victim to the very method of killing she had pioneered. In the quiet apartment she had called home, investigators found proof of a surprisingly simple lifestyle. Religious texts sat next to family photographs. There were no obvious signs of fancy wealth, no sign that she had kept connections to the criminal world. It was as if Griselda Blanco had been trying to disappear into the cloth of ordinary life, to become invisible in a way she had never been during her rule as the cocaine godmother, yet invisibility had escaped her, as it often does for those who have written their names in blood across the pages of criminal history. Someone had remembered, someone had waited, someone had decided that no matter her apparent change, Griselda Blanco's accounts remained unsettled as the sun set over Medellin on the day of her death, casting long shadows across a city that had seen so much bloodshed. The cycle of violence that had defined much of Colombia's recent history claimed one of its most famous planners. There was a certain poetic justice in her end that even Griselda might have appreciated, a symmetry, a closing of a circle that had begun decades earlier when she had first ordered men on motorcycles to get rid of her enemies. In the years that followed, as her story was told and told again, made bigger and dramatized, The woman herself became more and more hidden by her myth. The real Griselda Blanco, with her fears and regrets, her moments of tenderness toward her children and grandchildren, her possible search for forgiveness, faded behind the larger-than-life figure of La Madrina, the Black Widow who had loved and killed with equal passion. For those who had known her, who had feared her, who had chased her through the maze-like world of international drug smuggling, the news of her death brought a complicated closure. For the younger generation, who knew her only through documentaries and dramatizations, she became another character in the dark collection of drug legends. Her reality less important than what she represented, the ruthless ambition, the disregard for human life, the brutal efficiency that had marked an era, and somewhere, maybe, the anonymous figures who had ended her life continued their own existence, carrying with them the knowledge that they had closed one of the most bloody chapters in the history of the drug trade. Whether they acted from revenge, justice, or some other reason stayed their secret. Just one more mystery in the shadowed legacy of Griselda Blanco, the cocaine godmother whose rule had finally, definitely ended on a quiet street in Medellin with the same brutal efficiency that had been her trademark.